My name's Kiana. I'm a senior at Longwood University, and this is Key's PWI Survival Guide. Happy Lunar New Year and happy Black History Month. Welcome to the first official episode of the Survival Guide. So this month, I'll be talking about all things academic. So let's get into it. I wanted to preface that I have a little Google form floating around the Longwood community. And some of those responses have kind of shifted the way I am exploring things on campus. And so one of the questions I had was to rate students of color's educational satisfaction. And out of 10, the average answer is a 7, which again, that's average. So that's pretty good. But one of the prompts that really concerned me was a question. I feel that Longwood has nurtured my racial identity. And half of the participants basically responded that they strongly disagreed. And I think that especially a place like your university or your college should absolutely nurture all the parts of you that you're bringing to it and make you a better person. So I wanted to focus on coursework or classes that can build and foster a environment of inclusion, but also give students the tools to talk about different things like race or activism. So things like that. So in this episode specifically, I will be talking to Professor Betts as well as Dr. McGill and discussing how they are a part of the U.S. Race and Ethnic Studies minor, as well as talking to them about their intro class that they're teaching this semester. I will also be kind of diving into Dr. Shattenkirk's Citizen 110 class, and it's a class about activism through music. And not so much about the class itself, but more so about the community response to this class. But let's start with our intro to U.S. Race and Ethnic Studies class. In the next clips, I'll have Professor Betts as well as Dr. McGill introduce themselves and kind of discuss their academic disciplinary backgrounds and kind of talk about how they're qualified to teach this class. Also have Professor Betts discuss the structure of this class and how the interdisciplinary style fits this class. And yeah.
Hello, I am Shayla Betts, and I am one of the assistant professors of social work here at Longwood University. And I am also one of the 2 founding co-directors of the U.S. Race and Ethnic Studies minor. So my educational background is, of course, in social work. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I'm at LCSW. And I am also in the process of obtaining my doctoral degree in transformative social change. Yes, so like I said, I'm a very proud social worker. I've been actively engaging in practice since 2014, and I've been a licensed clinical social worker since 2017. And so in a lot of my practice, of course, I work with people of all social identities, but I found that as I continued my practice and as I began providing outpatient therapy, that I transitioned my scope of practice or my focus to individuals who are working through their racial identity, what that means in terms of privilege, oppression, navigating society, and things like that. So while I've worked in several different social work fields, I found myself gravitating to this particular focal point in this area of specialty. And so that, of course, has definitely informed my practice now that I am in academia, talking about those lived experiences, advocating for social justice. Of course, as a social worker, advocating and social justice are some of the biggest things that we do as social workers. And so, yeah.
Awesome. Sure. I'm Dr. Dave McGill. I'm the chair of the Department of English and Modern Languages. and I'm a professor of English. I teach literature of diversity, so I teach a lot of African American literature, gender studies, Native American literature, lots of stuff about race, gender, identity. That's really my kind of research focus. I did my PhD at the University of Kentucky, and then have taught at several universities before coming here, but Longwood's been a great home for many years, 13 years and counting. So when I first got to graduate school to get my PhD, my second semester there, I took a class on whiteness, and it was a class that I had before that I hadn't really thought of all the ways in which whiteness functioned. I knew I was white, but to think about whiteness as a concept was something I'd never done in that systematic a way, and it really challenged me and changed how I thought about my teaching. So I pursued a certificate in social theory, which was the kind of program at the University of Kentucky that included a lot of studies about race and gender and class and things like that. So it allowed me, in conjunction with my dissertation work on race and gender in the 1920s, to read a lot of theory and a lot of background and do a lot of studying on race and ethnicity in American history and culture. And so I brought that to bear and continued to study it throughout my scholarly career as I've read and written about African American authors, or about teaching Native American or teaching Indian American authors, that I've really kind of challenged myself to continue to grow in that way. And so I bring that disparate advantage from literature, but it's literature with a really grounded historical and social context base. So I have a lot of background in, as a scholar, in reading interdisciplinarily to understand how race works and how I can talk about it in terms of the literature that I study and the film and the kind of cultural context that I study it in. So that's kind of the background I bring to bear as a scholar.
So kind of going along with that intro class, could you talk to me about how it's being taught, like the structure?
Yeah, of course. So the introduction class we're really excited about that is co-taught each semester. And so what that means is, because race and ethnic studies is a multidisciplinary field and an interdisciplinary field, it was important for us to maintain that same perspective in the course. So it's co-taught very strategically with two professors from differing backgrounds as they teach the course. So last spring, I co-taught the course with Dr. Spencer Tricker, who is an English professor, and of course I'm social work. This year, I'm co-teaching with Dr. David McGill, who's also in the English department. And then next spring, it'll be Dr. McGill and somebody else from a different program. So we like doing it that way because we not only represent different disciplines, but our social identities are diverse. And so that adds that dynamic where you have diverse perspectives coming into play, but we're still a unified front in how we address and discuss.
Now that we know who Professor Betts and Dr. McGill are, I wanted to ask them about their identities and how their identities inform their teaching of the intro class to race and ethnic studies. And both of them had really special things to say about themselves, and specifically with Dr. McGill, I wanted to ask him about being a white professor teaching race and ethnic studies, or things to deal with diversity, because there is discourse around white professors teaching things that aren't necessarily their stories to tell. So I wanted to make sure that I asked those questions to answer, some of the questions students might have about learning from a white professor. But at the same time, Professor Betts' answer about her identity really opened my eyes, because there are so many parts of ourselves that we show at different times, and even though they're not always direct in that moment, they still make up who we are.
I think it is crucial to in all my classes, but certainly in the race and ethnic studies classes, to foreground voices of Black, Indigenous people of color. Absolutely, positively. And so I come as someone who is trained in the ability to read and analyze and work with those writings, but it's very important for me that that's what comes front and center, and that my own experience is really, you know, I don't want to say secondary. I want to say that I come from a very specific situational vantage point. I come as a white male cisgender person who brings a certain viewpoint, but I am very aware that I have not experienced certain things and that I need to be open and listening to all of those things. And I think so when we, one of the things we do in the intro class is to really balance personal experience and the kind of theoretical and social and structural things we want to talk about, and the kind of theories and studies and statistics that help us uncover that work. So I'm doing that part, but I also want to make sure I'm allowing people of color to bring in their experiences and their voices. That's one of the reasons in the intro class we really foreground. We have several guest speakers. We just had Jill Ahmad, who is a Black woman, Muslim in the Farmville community who does a lot of community organizing. We will have Dr. Spencer Tricker, who is an Asian American professor here on campus. We have several other community members who are coming in to bring in those distinct viewpoints. And our students are wide ranging as well. And we ask them to talk about their experiences, but also we want to give them a vocabulary for how to talk about race as a kind of structural vision that allows them to balance that. So we're always balancing the different voices that we hear, whether they're scholarly, personal, community-oriented, some mix of all of those. We're really trying to make sure that we foreground those voices of color, and we have a commitment to, as often as we can, to make sure that faculty of color are teaching the intro course.
Yeah, so also what you'll find in the social work discipline is a term that we call use of self. And so use of self is our ability to reflect on our personal experiences and use that as a way to understand, develop empathy, build connection with others. It does not mean that it's all about us and we're telling our stories, and it means that we recognize that we have our own personal lived experiences as well, and that we as social beings can find ways to relate, to expand our perspectives and things like that. So I bring a lot of that into the course. And sometimes I do give examples from my personal life or from my professional life. Like maybe I'll pull on some previous clients that I've had and talked about that. So I think it's important to note that even though this is a race and ethnic studies course, we look at the whole range of persons. So while yes, I am a Black woman, I'm also a young Black Christian woman, able-bodied, straight, cisgender. And so we look at the dynamics of multiple intersections and what that may mean for somebody's experience. And we do focus a lot on that race and ethnicity, of course, but there are a lot of mitigating examples that come into play that we also address.
I got both professors to discuss how they approach difficult conversations or discussing information that all groups might not believe when it comes to groups of color. And I really appreciated how they both would like to approach these conversations directly, but also trying to meet everyone where they are. Because everyone, as both Dr. McGill and Professor Betts have stated, believe in their identities. But there is a culture around talking about race that is adverse, that is sometimes hostile or uncomfortable. And that's one of the things I kind of went with this question about critical race theory and what that would mean for our upcoming higher education students, so kids coming out of K-12. What does that mean? How will those things affect them or lack thereof?
Yeah, I think that kind of comes back to setting that foundation of safety versus comfort and how to engage in constructive conversations. How do we communicate in ways that we will continue to build our connection and can strengthen our relationships compared to this right or wrong, black or white, either or conversation. Um, I think that part of that is just discussing what maybe is less discussed, like what goes unsaid. An example is oftentimes slavery is taught as a part of Black history, um, but there's more to it than that. It's also American history. It's white history. We wouldn't have had it if it weren't for that. So just what other perspectives are true? We know the dominant perspective. We know what we've been taught for years. But we also know if a situation happens and there are multiple people involved, each person may have a different account for that. And it's just honoring the voices that we don't typically hear from and changing that narrative to show that every voice, every story has value. And it's not for us to decide the hierarchy of that.
The last thing I kind of wanted to close out with is some texts that Dr. McGill really enjoys teaching.
I am teaching right now the novel Passing by Noah Larson, which was just made into a movie on Netflix. Read the book first. I'm an English teacher. I got to make you read the book first. But really interesting novel about two mixed race women in the 1920s when mixed race was not being acknowledged. So you read the black or you're white, who had white skin could pass for white, and one of them does, and one of them doesn't, and how they're negotiating their friendship and how their relationship and what's going on there. It's a really fascinating novel from the past that helps us understand a lot of things about where we came from. And I always, in my African American Lit survey, I begin Passing to one of the first novels I teach. I always end with Paul Beatty's The White Boy Shuffle, which is my favorite novel. And that book will challenge every stereotype, belief, thing you could think about what it means to be black in America. And he holds no prisoners. It's a satire, so it's meant to be very sharp-witted, and it just takes to task everyone. It doesn't matter who you are. That book's got something to say about silly things that people say and weird beliefs and erroneous beliefs that people hold. And it just attacks and attacks and attacks to say, we need to change the world. I mean, that's what satires do. They try to change your mind so that you see the world in a new way. And that book does it as well as any book I've ever read. So I tell everybody to read The White Boy Shuffle, and I teach it every single chance I get.
I wanted to make sure that I relayed some of the information that Professor Betts gave me about where to find the course description, where to find the course catalog, as well as the website for the minor. So I will link all that stuff in the description. But kind of going back to our culture, Dr. Shattenkirk's Citizen 110 class is a class, again, that discusses activism through music. And activism can mean so many things. So for the intro class, it means going out into the community, getting involved, and doing a hands-on approach. But from what Dr. Shattenkirk is apparently studying is how music influences social movements. So the things that you can discuss in music that you can't always say out loud. And I thought that was a really interesting approach to looking at activism. But even though it's well-intentioned, Longwood usually spotlights its classes like this. So I kind of wanted to talk about some of the online responses from parents, grandparents, people that